City Matters.
Hello and welcome back to History Repeats. I'm your host, as always, Liam Carballal. Joining me once more is Richard Acritelli. Richard, Richard, when we last talked, we were talking about mostly the war itself, the politics, the global politics. But, you know, wars are fought by individual people. And before we came back on, we were talking a little bit about Billy Joel's. His life is very quintessential post-World War II life. What's his family story? You wrote an article for this, right?
Yeah, I just did an article on him. What's the big thing you look at when you see Billy Joel?
Piano?
The piano, but he looks like your next door neighbor.
Yeah.
He looks like a guy like you would pass in the store.
Yeah.
He goes out with all these models like Christy Brinkley and all these like gorgeous women, right? But he looks like your neighbor would be cutting his lawn.
Yeah.
Okay, so he grows up in Hicksville.
Long Island boy.
He moves out from the Bronx. He lives in a Levittown house, right? You have towns like Wantor, Hicksville, Levittown, Westbury, North Belmore, right? All these areas, East Meadow, that are all communities that are built as a result of World War II through the GI Bill.
Yeah, the housing
and everything. Yeah. So I did not know this. I knew a little bit in terms of the anti-Semitism that was seen down in Charlottesville, that he started playing in concerts with a star on his front and his back of his suit jacket.
Really?
Which we would see here on the other side of this wall at the Holocaust Museum, right?
Wow.
I always thought it was just him against some of the controversial views of Trump when he came to Charlottesville, and then that nasty incident that was down there was really bad, right? From a couple of years ago. But his family, some of them survived the Holocaust. So here he is a Jewish-American performer from Hicksville. His family leaves Germany. I believe it was his father, right?
Yeah.
That ends up getting sent to Switzerland because the Nuremberg laws were so bad.
Yeah.
His family had money, but it was getting very dangerous. So they end up selling their textile factory where they make all kinds of clothing. They end up leaving Germany. They go into Switzerland almost before it was too late. They don't have phony papers, right? Who knows what kind of paperwork they had to get into Switzerland. And it says Juden on their paperwork, right? And they said, well, if they got caught at the border, who knows if the Germans were going to send them back or send them to a concentration camp or how the Swiss were going to respond. They took a big chance. They sold their factory for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
Turns out that factory made clothing that ended up clothed the concentration camp inmates itself there.
I did not know that.
I had no idea about that. And that's the interesting part of Billy Joel, the piano man, unbelievable voice, makes one hit after another. The franchise in all the places around here, closer now with MSG, right? He is resembling of Long Islanders who served in the war and had family members that perished as a result of the Holocaust. He had family members that died. Okay, they believe some of them died in Auschwitz. Wow. So now what ends up happening is his dad comes home. There's anti-Semitism, the HBO documentary that was just done. There's nothing quite like that. If they touched upon his family's history, it wasn't as much as what HBO had just done. Yeah. Probably maybe a third of that episode, there was 2 main episodes that were 2 hours long, was based on his family.
Yeah.
So what happens is his dad comes over, they live very average, blue collar, middle class, like most of Long Island, right? Yeah. Working class. So there was actually signs of racism and hatred and stuff like that
Yeah.
for what was the Meadowbrook Swim Club.
Yeah.
That Jews were not allowed there.
Yeah. There's sundown towns in
Yeah,
Oyster Bay.
like
or
with,
was it?
with Robert Moses, right?
Yeah.
With the bridges. He builds these beautiful bridges, unbelievable stonework, right?
Yeah.
But he doesn't want the city buses that are most likely going to carry the blacks and the poor people
Yeah.
to his beloved state park. So that's the irony. Yeah. Robert Moses was Jewish. Mm-hmm. The parks were built for the average people, right? On Long Island, the parkways go to the parks, right? Mm-hmm. And in the 1930s, he refused to lower the cost to get into the parks or over the bridges so that people can go there because he didn't want either the blacks or the poor people from the city there. So you see that like resentment here. So his dad, was very distant in terms of Billy Joel and his sister. I think his sister's name was Judith. And he leaves when Billy Joel's 8 years old.
Abandons the family.
So he goes back to Europe. He uses the phrase to his son, "This world is a cesspool," because he liberates Dachau. Mm-hmm. He sees that American soldiers went crazy. Mm-hmm. They thought the war was coming to an end and that the Germans were very closely related to the United States and middle class and nice homes and so on, right? We start going to the camps, they go crazy, right? Because they can't believe this stuff is, they heard rumors, but until they actually saw it, they couldn't really put it together, right? Our government knew, but that's a completely different story. So now you have a younger man, he's not making much money here. He's got the war on him, veteran, he's got 2 kids, right? He ends up going back to Germany, and then he ends up in Austria. Yeah. The song Vienna, which is a great song by Billy Joel, unbelievable song. I always liked it. I always liked the way it sounded, and I didn't know really what it meant. It was in connection to his father, because he was playing in Europe, and the crazy thing was, like, he always had like that hollow feeling because I just want to meet my father and see him and do these things. He was a talented musician and piano player, and the mother too, was with the arts and stuff, to the point that Billy Joel learned how to box. Yeah. Because kids would be making fun of you. You got those big communities. You got a lot of kids, they're tough kids. And
people don't realize this, but when you hear that song, "We Didn't Start the Fire," he makes all those boxing references. It's because he was a boxer.
He was a boxer. He was a pretty tough kid. Yeah. He was an average kid, So it's sad because he meets his dad. His brother was like head of like band symphonies. He was in the front with the, he was directing everyone, and it's unbelievable musical family.
The stepbrother, right?
The stepbrother, his half brother there, and
half brothers.
And him and his dad are playing the piano, and it's like almost like a father and son having a catch, right? Yeah. But there wasn't that bond. No. And you could see them standing. One's kind of over here, the other one's over there. They're making small talk. But it was a very, very distant relationship. And how does this get back into the war itself? Because you had millions of soldiers coming home from both fronts, right? From the European and Pacific theaters.
We weren't bombed. Nobody fought here.
Very little.
We were like one of the few countries to claim we actually won the war.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what they always say about the American middle class from like 1945 to 1990. It's one of the strongest groups of people that were ever produced because we were ripe and ready to go. Yeah. You have your economic downturns, right? Like after World War II. Because they're trying to take this massive wartime economy and now put it into peace, where the military now is limited, and they're not quite sure what the Cold War is at this time. Demobilization itself, right? The only reason why those troops are kept in those places is because there's so many of them. They're trying to figure out, all right, how do we get these people back into American society? Yeah. And that was the GI Bills. Something I used in the service was one of the strongest pieces of legislation. And that gets back to Billy Joel, where a lot of those homes in those areas of Nassau County and then later Suffolk County, where suburbia, right? You see with Back to the Future, right? Yeah. When Marty McFly goes back, it's a new town. That's so, those are mostly veterans who are going to buy those homes, right? what you're looking at is that Billy Joel lived in the middle of that World War II community.
Yeah.
You know, and it was amazing. Like, you just see him talk about, you know, the experience of his dad going into the camps and his family getting out, and, you know, family members that died over there. And it's something. It's that connection that many Long Islanders had, especially, you know, if you're a liberator, right? And we have liberators in this camp, in this museum here, that lived in these areas, and they didn't talk about it until later on in life.
I would,
you know, because, you know, what was the thought at that time? Go home, white picket fence, maybe use some of your benefits from the government, you know, become a police officer, you know, put college. A suit on, go to college, but don't talk about any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Today, it's the opposite. You're expected to talk about, you know, what you've seen, and it's very, very nasty things these soldiers saw. But they came back and they built up areas of Long Island.
Yeah.
So they go off to war, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. They come back, now they're 23, 24, 25. And a lot of the colleges up here were developed, expanded as a result of the GI Bill, you know? So.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think just how much of just like what we live through, or we just, our everyday lives are affected by it. Like the highway system is because Eisenhower had dealt with the Autobahn.
And you see the 5 stars.
Yeah.
And also you got to remember, he was a Midwestern kid from Abilene, Kansas.
Yeah.
He knew how bad the transportation system was in the western part of the country. Yeah. And now they're going to connect the cities, and the urbanized areas, to the suburbs. Yeah. You know, he actually drove across the country in a convoy after World War I, and he saw for himself how bad the roads were. Yeah. And you see those roads here on Long Island. I teach over at Suffolk Community College in Brentwood. When you get off the Parkway over there to Sagato's or to Sunken Meadow, right? You could see that sign, you know, and it's got the 5 stars, which is really interesting, you know. So, and one thing, our infrastructure at that time was probably the strongest in the world. Now, I wouldn't say it's one of the worst, but it's just getting old at the same time. So it's important through good and through bad times to keep that infrastructure going. But that was as a result of World War II, the baby boom, populations. You know, when they say people have 2, 3, 4 kids, it's a good amount of kids. It's not huge, right? But when every person in your neighborhood has 2, 3, 4 kids, then that's a big deal. And those areas are bustling with populations, you know, schools, stores. It was like a good time. My grandfather came home from World War II. He started selling insurance. And it was made mandatory at the time. He did very well for himself, you know, and he never graduated high school. It was a Great Depression. He was in the field artillery in Brooklyn during the Great Depression itself. Him and my Uncle Bay went into the military. My Uncle Bay was a gunner on a B-24 bomber. And, you know, they came home, and even though they made it through the hardships of the war, especially my Uncle Bay, who flew over Germany, there was a lot of opportunity for them to come home to. You know, now you have all these soldiers. Now there's got to be services for them and their families. Think about it. You know, the baby boom started in like 1944, when you have soldiers that go over for the first half of the war coming home. You know, they want to have that sense of normalcy. But they live with, you know, some very, very tough, you know, memories. My uncle, he was a gunner, and he won a Distinguished Flying Cross, right? He was a machine gunner. And he would drive from Sparta, New Jersey to Montauk. And he ran hotels out in Montauk. And I always tell, like, my aunt and uncle, he, at some point when he was driving out there, you know, he was, you know, thinking about the war and everything that he'd seen, things that he rarely spoke about, you know. So, but, you know, it's an interesting part because we look at the domestic, right? And we see it here on Long Island as being this tiny place, a speck on the map, but a hugely populated area, right? And it's going to be tied to the city, right? And we always have to be concerned about the foreign policy because even though Americans are coming home and we're shaking hands with the Soviets, now that's really the establishment of the Cold War. You know, the Cold War really is going to start at the end of World War II. You know, when Truman, you know, looks at Stalin and he says, man, this guy's smart, but I think I could manage him. You know, and he tells him that we had the gadget, the device. That's really the start of the Cold War for the next 45 years, you know, and it's something where you had that poker game in terms of us fighting the Nazis and the Japanese. And now it turns into a chess game between us and the Soviets. It's us against them, you know, with them controlling so many countries and then us. And then you get the likes of Patton, who nobody wanted to hear that we should have just kept on going. But what did Patton say? You can't allow the major European cities to fall to communism because they're not going to leave. They, you know, they lose 29 million, you know, citizens. You know, those areas were buffer countries, you know, and they didn't like being part of the Soviet Union. The Poles, they hate the Soviets, and today they hate the Russians. The Hungarians and the Czechs will have their own revolts. And, you know, they basically almost have a gun to their back, that sort of thing, for a very long period of time. And then immigration, which we know after 1990, the Russians are now going to come here to Queens and Brooklyn in large numbers. Because for 70 years, from the end of World War I, and then the Russian Revolution, right? They're stuck. They're stuck. And we don't want any Russians and then Soviets here because we really are concerned about communism and it's spreading, you know?
There's actually, in my hometown, Seacliff, there's two Russian Orthodox churches. And they're both, I think they were both built after the Cold War started, just from like conservative Russians fleeing the Soviets. So, just kind of wild to see just how much of the world has been shaped.
But. And it gets definitely shaped at this point. You know, Truman is he's a junior wartime president. Stalin has been in, you know, 1920s, you know, maybe even 25, maybe, because Lenin dies, right? So he's been there. Churchill at Potsdam, he's going to get voted out of office. FDR dies. But, you know, Truman was one of those presidents where they always say, like, if you look at Obama, then Trump, then Biden, and now Trump again, you got to give them at least 10 to 15 years to see if their policies really worked out. Truman is one of those guys where, you know, he doesn't have the flair of FDR and then later Eisenhower, almost like a John Adams, right? He's got Washington before him and Jefferson after him. You know, like it's tough. You know, he was more of a regular guy. He spoke his part. He's got some of the greatest sayings, you know, the buck stops here. And right, what is it? If it's too, you know, hot in the kitchen or whatever the case was, then get out, you know, that sort of thing. You know, people kind of looked at him. They kind of said, you know, he's not exactly FDR, but he's going to establish the guidelines of the Cold War through the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan. You know, like, hey, listen, the Soviets, the one thing they respect the least is weakness. You're seeing that with the Russians today. The Russians are outproducing the United States and NATO when it comes to ammunition right now. They've completely gone to a wartime economy. Now, I don't think they've done a great job fighting against the Ukrainians, right? Because of the brutality of the war, right? But they don't respect to weakness. When Trump meets with Putin in Alaska, Trump just can't be glad to get peace. It can't be a victor's peace. You know, and the Ukrainians had to have some sort of say over it, or they're not going to, they're just going to keep on going. You know, so at the end of World War II, we kind of realize that our allies, you know, are no longer our friends. You know, that, you know, those free elections never came to parts of Central and Eastern Europe. That, you know, you look at Greece and Turkey, they hate each other, but they don't want to be communists. And that's the irony of NATO, right? That if one gets attacked, they have to support each other. You know, so what does that show you? We don't like each other, but we don't want to be communists either. Like we just spoke about in our last episode with the Japanese, they didn't want to be communists either. I mean, I'm not trying to give them any props in terms of the end of World War II, but they ended up fighting, against the Soviets itself there, because they realized that we don't want this form of government here, right? The Japanese knew there was going to be changes, right? And MacArthur's going to end up leading that country for like 6 years, and he'll rewrite the Constitution and everything else. But communism was just a Scrooge that nobody wanted. It was like crazy, if you think about it, and closer to home, right? The first United Nations here on the East Coast was in Lake Success and then Manhattan. And, this was a global community where, if you remember, the League was a good idea, but it was so weak that the UN was supposed to right some of the wrongs of World War II, that sort of thing. So,
we just mentioned the UN. I think one last thing we should mention with the post-war, so the creation of Israel. Up until that point, there was still a lot of ethnic tension between Palestinians and Israelis, or Jewish Israelis, and it culminated in the War of Independence in 1948. There's just one story about it that I always thought was very funny. Harry Truman was president at the time, and there was, I guess the opinion of the State Department was like, we can't recognize Israel because that will alienate the Arabs. We need oil. The Cold War's starting. We're going to need oil. This is not a good idea. But Truman's like, I want the basis of my foreign policy to be at least based somewhat in justice.
Yeah.
So he was on the fence. And what turned it, this is just so funny to me, his best friend...
Yeah, it was his former business partner.
Business partner.
Yeah.
The guy was a traveling salesman. He was not involved in the State Department or he wasn't a diplomat or a lobbyist. He was just some guy, and he just kept pressuring.
He was Jewish.
Yeah.
And he spoke to Truman and said, these are the sufferings that you know of. It's time for this group of people to have their own homeland.
Yeah.
There's another thing that gets into that decision is, not only, the massive toll of the Holocaust and the suffering, and then the British not wanting, Jews to come there, especially during World War II, because of the fragile peace that they had, or stability, was they were concerned that it was possible that if America did not recognize Israel, then the Soviets would.
Yeah.
And that they did not want Israel to start gravitating in that general direction. You had, some groups of people that were still shifting very far to the left.
Yeah.
And they were concerned about that. Yeah. They're extremely concerned about, the Soviets taking over in areas of the Mediterranean, and gaining those warm water ports and being a little too close. That's why Greece and Turkey, that was a little too close for comfort.
Yeah.
And those were some of the few places to survive the onslaught of the communist movement. And, they called armed minorities in Greece and Turkey. They were the communists, and given money, a lot of money, was $700 million at that time, to countries that were non-traditional American allies, but they did not want to be communist. And they realized that pretty quickly, that something had to be done. And when you look at Israel, how many people had to, break like British, blockades and embargoes and stuff like that just to get in there, And then what ends up happening? Truman, declares the U.S. approval, right? Support, recognition. And then the Arabs attack the next day, And for all those years, they always said, we're going to drive the Israelis back into the sea and so on. And even the college students here were saying, that phrase they were using. And the Israelis have grown into immensely strong military power.
Yes.
And what you're looking at is they got to watch the wars they fight, because their economy's got to be able to sustain it, and it's a tough area of the world. But they've proven that they could stay on their feet, that they can keep going, and be surrounded and not have the same population size and resources. And it's pretty amazing what comes out of World War II. Yeah. is that tremendous amount of suffering that we see here at the museum ends up becoming a major country, strongest democracy in that entire area.
Yeah.
So it's a very challenging time for Truman. And you get presidents like Washington, right? He establishes the precedent of government.
Yep.
Lincoln, in terms of the Civil War, right? Truman, the Cold War, and then Bush with the War on Terror. Yeah. It's not easy being the first when it comes to those major situations. They make mistakes, but they also have many successes that lay the groundwork. Other presidents will kind of deviate a little bit, but not completely. And even today, President Trump doesn't like the former presidents before him, and he'll hammer them very vocally. Yep. But there's still things that he adheres to from the War on Terror that was established, and so on. So,
well, Rich, it's always good to see you.
Yeah, no problem, Liam. Thank you.
This has been History Repeats. I'm your host, Liam Carballal, and join us next time. This is hmTv. Thank you.